I've gone ahead and done some preliminary installs from where we stopped before. So I'm going to go over a few things that we got going on here. First thing I did is set up all the servos on the bench, HR3 in the radio. I don't include the 3GX in the mix. I get all my servos here set at their proper 90 degrees with the sub trim, since we are using a single-sided arm. You have to so it's important to remember that. Also, what's important to remember is the layout of your servos with the Align 3GX. Okay, remember your pitch servo is always on your driver's side. Okay, aileron is on the passenger side, and that is key for setup with 3GX 3.1. I'm going to be using right now. We do have a 3.2 coming out, beta tested by Jamie. Once I get this tested and fly, I'll upgrade that and do a little more there. But back to this, as you see then, I've gone ahead and put the grommets and the brass inserts and got my servos laid in and got my wires out of the way, okay? I know which servos are where. I'm using the Futaba S-Bus system setup on my 14SG. So at this point, I just have my receiver laying on the side with a battery pack to keep everything powered up. So then what I like to do at that point is build my links and my rods, okay? Align has this great swash plate leveling tool, okay? Designed for 550 to 800, has an insert for the smaller stuff. And I laid this down on the on this main shaft. Now I have a perfectly level swash plate on all 3 points. My servos at mid stick are 90 degrees. I adjusted each individual link, okay? So we have our swash plate touching. So we have a level swash plate. I have not set mid stick 0 yet, okay? That'll come when I put the head on. I'll gauge the head up with the new lines that we put in the head for our 0 marks. And then at that point, continue further on with the setup. So just go over a few other things we've done here also is with the 3GX, I've removed the witness line. You see the mold line or witness line here so it doesn't rock. We've got it locked down nice with one piece of tape. I'm going to run a stock setup right now for its preliminary flights, just to spin the helicopter around. As you see what's going on here, it's got my battery for setup and my receiver. So we all like to have a nice layout. My receiver is probably going to get tucked in on this side. I like to put it on the driver's side. I typically work when I'm at the field on what I call the passenger side of the helicopter. Batteries plug in and stuff like that. So as you know, thinking about layout, the 160 will get in here. I may have to trim this back off here, this area right here. Be able to get this in here. The wires will go through the hole. I'll be able to cut them back a little shorter. Put my ends on and have a nice short plug-in right into our Dominator 490 kV motor, 850 MX. And at this point, so I've kept some of the wires clean just to keep it out of the way for setup. I have our rudder wire in. I'll deal with that once the boom is, with linkage, all that stuff, and get that 90'd up. But as you can see, level swash plate is absolutely critical for 3GX setup or any fly barless setup. You have to have a mechanically level swash plate. This is something important. This is all something we learned back from the day flying fly barless helicopter, or fly barred helicopters. So put that out of the way. I'm going to spin this around. At this point, what I'm going to do is we're going to move on to putting the head on. Okay, we'll get the links down. I'll put a set of rotor blades on it. We'll get our digital pitch gauge on it. And we'll start working from there on our pitch range and stuff like that. So, okay, just wanted to go over a few other things that we've done here. Blades are on. I use the hash marks on the grips and in the head to give me 0 pitch. Worked out really well. With the digital meter, I think I was within 0.2 of being at 0. I've gone in and set up the machine with 14 degrees of pitch, doing the DIR setup, and I'll show you in the radio. Okay, here are my settings, or my numbers. Okay, that's 14 degrees of pitch. 8 degrees of cyclic in my Furtado setup, okay? So once again, mid-stick, level swatch plate, 0 swatch plate, okay? I use the Align leveling tool, and then I went ahead and got the blades on, and at that point set the radio at mid-stick in DIR mode, okay? And the way you access DIR mode is you plug in your battery, you have your radio on, you plug in your battery, you hold down your set button. As the lights start to tick up, you let go of the button. That deactivates the gyros. And then once you go through your calibration process, it's going to ask you, for direction. So basically you want to make sure that you have positive and negative pitch, so everything's going up and down, forward and aft, left and right. So we check that on the elevator, on the pitch, and then on the elevator actually, make sure it's going forward. Okay. Then we check the compensation. So I tilt the helicopter forward, and if it's not tilting back the swatch, we reverse that by just moving the elevator stick, okay? So the light shows red. And then we do our elevator learn limit. So we learn the limit by pushing this forward. Green light will blink, let it go. Go to our next parameter, which is setting your aileron. Read your aileron stick throw. Once it reads that, so before we even get there, what you wind up doing is tilting the helicopter to yourself, making sure that your compensation is correct, okay? Then go to your next step, which will be to learn the aileron. Hold the stick over to the right, the light's gonna flash, okay, on the 3GX, then you let it go. It learns your aileron. So I set this machine up, like I said, 14 degrees of pitch, 8 degrees of cyclic. And at that point, you hit your black button again on the 3GX, the machine will reset. Once that point, your DIR setup is complete. Then you can move on to doing your tail limits and throws. I don't have the tail on yet. I'm not ready for that right now. And then the last step is, even though it's electric, I'll do the throttle calibration and go through that, and it kind of finishes the programming loop. So I move on to the tail. In my brake, from all my links set up and everything in the head, I turned around and pulled the tail box out of the package, went through everything, and basically just a few pointers back here, okay? Black gears, okay? Make sure your ball's on the outer hole. Please remember to disassemble the tail box. It's important here. There's a very small screw, okay, that holds this yoke, we'll call it, in. It's 1.5 inside the case. None of the bolts in the case are Loctited, okay? They're just in place. Take these bolts all out. Make sure you Loctite this bolt that holds this yoke in place here, okay? Maybe a little Loctite in here from the factory, but I like to break it free, wet it up, and put a good amount of Loctite on there to hold that bolt from the inside, okay? Then I assemble the outside case, Loctiting all these bolts here, okay, along with the two on this side here. Then what I like to do is slowly work on the smaller bolts here on the pitch arm, okay, for the tail rotor. And what I do is just have a little dab of Loctite in front of me, and I start on the bolts in here, the Allen bolts. Pull one out, wet it, make sure it's nice and neat, and put them back in. Don't get it on the bearings, nothing gets stuck. And I snug these up as I go out, okay? Making sure I constantly have a smooth operation, okay? There is no play in this setup. It's very smooth, very precise. The quality of the parts are the highest possible that Align can manufacture, okay? And keep the parts counts very low. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is that these Allen cap head bolts here that pinch the yoke, okay, around your slider bolt, which is Loctited in, okay? Those you just back out, just run them down, okay? Just snug on the yoke. Then I proceeded to Loctite for the dog bones, okay? The gold screw, same thing. A little dab of Loctite, run it in, snug, good. This is an important part here, okay? A lot of problems happen here where people put a little too much Loctite. There's a brass sleeve inside this plastic dog bone here, and you get the Loctite on it, and that will cause this to stick and the tail will hunt. okay? What I like to do is pull it out as an assembly, the screw and the brass sleeve, dip it in the Loctite, slide it back through the dog bone into the grip, thread it in, snug, both sides, same process, okay? Then I went down to the grub screw for the new tail rotor hub, okay? Pulled that out, little Loctite, back in, and a firm twist. And I moved on to our tail rotor grips. Align came out with these new tail rotor grips with the bigger thrust bearings and the radial bearings inside. I think they released these about a year and a half ago. Now this assembly was Loctited together here, but I broke it free, pulled it out. There was a dab of grease on the thrust bearings. Due to the fact of our new tail ratio, I like to make sure I pack these very well in here, okay? And basically just pull them out. I use the silicone grease that we have in the kit. Pack the thrust bearing really well, and then at that point put the assembly back in, a little Loctite on the bolt, run in, snug it up, okay? Straightforward. Then I turn around and just put the tail blades on. These are our newly redesigned tail blades. These are 115s. They come in 105s also. And run the bolts in, and I run them snug. You want to keep clamp pressure on the blade, on the tail rotor blades. Okay. This will prevent any humming, and the hum will come from the tail rotor blade. And I know we said to run them loose, but we actually found that keeping a little pressure on them and keeping them straight out will stop them. If they're a little too loose, they'll start to fall out of track because they'll wear. So just keep them tight or snug, firm, and you know, when they snap out in flight, you know, as you spool up, they'll be perfect. Okay. So there we have the completed tail case. Let's put this down for a second. Align has been doing, when they came out with the Dfc, they started with a lot of their overmold. Okay, overmold is a very difficult process. Some people may not know that, but creating these overmolds over carbon fiber is a precise, high quality operation. Align has fantastic molding equipment. I've seen it in the factory. What they've done now, this is adding some rigidity to the carbon fins. Okay, they've outlined it and gives you a little more visibility. Of course, Align brands everything, and this will help absorb any harmonics because all machines, the gearing and stuff, have a small amount of harmonics, and as it travels out the boom, this will help absorb that and eliminate any of those unsightly harmonics and create a super smooth machine. Okay, so this will get put on in a few minutes. I have my tail case. The other thing I went ahead and did is taking the torque tube, Loctited our bearings on. We're going to let that set up. Okay.
My medication for that.
Okay, so I've gone ahead and put one of our rubber grommets over our bearing. I have the other bearing here setting up. In a few minutes we'll put that on, and then what I'll do is I'll use a little oil or lube to help slide it down the boom for the machine and the setup. So I'm just going to pull out our tail rotor clamp here. Set this off the side along with the fin. I have the tail rotor push rod right here. We're going to get the end screwed on. Later on we'll work on setting up the tail geometry. We'll do the 3GX end limits with it. Simple, that's very simple. Have the helicopter on, you have the your radio and your helicopter on, you hold down your DIR button, that puts you up in the setup mode. We're going to check that you know, we're in digital servo mode in the 520 frame rate. And then we'll go into our limits. I'll set our left and right limit, travel limit. At that point we'll continue through the setup here, and once we're done with that, it's set. Very simple, straightforward setup with the 3GX. Okay, and then what I'll do is later on, when I'm all finished, we'll plug it in. I'll show you some of the software, show you my basic setup I'm going to be running, and it'll be straightforward. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more stuff plugged in, and we'll go over, do an overview. Okay, so